Hey, recording now. This is lesson 3.5, multiplying whole numbers by decimals less than 1. Before watching the recording, please make sure that you have a graph sheet of paper in front of you and you have a ruler or a proper straight edge and a pencil and perhaps a highlighter as well. So if you need to pause the recording to get those items, please do so now. I'm going to continue, so I'm going to warn you ahead of time, there is going to be a lot of writing for this video, so just be prepared. If I'm going too fast, again, pause it, and then you can replay it to catch up as you need. So let's just, you should have the title written down at the top of your page, 3.5, multiplying whole numbers by decimals less than 1. In previous lessons, you would have worked with multiplying whole numbers by decimals greater than 1. So this lesson will focus on decimal numbers that are less than 1. But first, let's work on some patterns that we're going to establish here. So as we write the next series of equations, I want you to think about the patterns that you see with the numbers and decimals being multiplied and the resulting product. Just remember that a product, and jot this down, a product is the answer to a multiplication question. Okay, and that's something that you should have encountered in previous years, but like I said, we always review vocabulary because it's important. Product is the answer to a multiplication question. Now, again, I mentioned I want you to focus on the patterns that you see in these series of equations we're going to write down. So the first set, and you can do this, I think, in a pretty straightforward way. We're just going to write out your multiplication tables for ones. So you can go ahead of me if you want. You can pause the recording and catch up. I'm just going to continue here. And this is pretty straightforward. Hey Siri, stop the timer, please. Sorry, that was my timer. Obviously, I am at home right now, so I am just gonna keep going. You might hear my cat in the background too, so that is also an added distraction. That will keep you entertained. Okay, I'm gonna stop at 1 times 9 here. Okay, so that's our first column, the 1 times tables from 1 to 9, okay? Now, the next column, and let's just block this off here. Let's do this in, actually, I'll just use black here. So use your straight edge and block it off once you've written all of those down. Okay. We know that when we multiply whole number by whole number, we get a whole number. So pretty straightforward. The next column, we're going to focus on, instead of multiplying by 1, we're going to multiply by 1/10. And I'm just going to write down here, this is all whole numbers. Okay. So we're going to do 1/10. And I'm not going to write the answers out yet. I want you to think about what the answer will be for each of these equations. Keep in mind, you're multiplying by 1/10, not by 1, not by 10, but by 1/10, okay? Or 0.1. So times 4, times 5, times 6, times 7, times 8, and times 9. Okay. So maybe by now you've had a chance to think about what these answers could be. Now, sure, I'm going to write down here, I know in my answer to 1/10 times 1, I'm going to have a 1, right? But the answer is not going to be 1 because I'm multiplying by 0.1 or 1/10. Because I'm multiplying by 0.1 or 1/10, there's a decimal here. We also know that we're multiplying it by 1. So the answer is going to be itself. You know the rule about multiplying anything by 1, the answer will be itself. So your answer to that is going to be 1/10, right? I know in the next line that I'm going to have a 2 in my product, but the answer is not going to be 2. It's also not going to be 20 because you're not multiplying by 10, you're multiplying by 1/10. So think to yourself, what is the answer going to be? You can follow the pattern from above. If 1/10 times 1 is 1/10, then shouldn't 1/10 by times 2 be 2/10? Does that make sense to you? You have to think too in this case that your product is going to be less than the whole number multiplier. So again, we follow the same pattern. Okay, I know that for 1/10 times 3, I know I'm going to have a 3 in my answer because I'm doing 1 times 3, but it's not 3. It's also not going to be 30 because you're not multiplying by 10. You're multiplying by 1/10. And this may seem strange to you that your answer is getting smaller, but what you're actually doing is you're multiplying the whole number by a fraction or a decimal of the whole number. And this will make more sense when we multiply decimal numbers and we talk about percent of a number. But for now, just know that your answer does get smaller, so it's 3/10. You can fill in the rest as you go too, because you know that it's going to follow the same pattern. You're multiplying everything here by 1/10, which means that your product is going to be in the tenths place because it's only going that far. Okay? All right, so when you're finished, you can block this out too. Okay, so I'm just going to write a note here. Here, we multiplied, let's do, we multiplied by, okay. Now, perhaps you can predict what the next column will be. We're just dealing with simple decimals that just have 1 in the tenths place, and then now we're dealing with decimals that have a 1 in the hundredths place. So, here we go. Okay. I want to challenge you, and I want you to try and figure out what the resulting products of these equations will be. Keep in mind, it can't be the same as the previous two columns. And also keep in mind that this time, you're not multiplying by 1, you're not multiplying by 1/10, you're multiplying by 1/100th in each case. So think about what's going to happen to the product. I want you to pause the video and predict, what do you think is going to happen to the product? I am going to continue. So I know my answer has to have a 1 in it, right? In this case. Well, I know it's not just 1/10. It's actually going to get smaller because you're multiplying by a smaller decimal. 1/100th is smaller than 1/10. Oh, guess what? Your answer is going to be 1/100th anyways because you're multiplying it by 1 and the answer is itself. Well, if that's the case, then again, I know in the next line that I'm going to have a 2 in my product. I know the answer is not 2. I know the answer is not going to be 0.2 or 2/10. I'm going to follow the pattern from above, and I know it's going to be 2/100ths. So I'm going to continue here. So I know that 1/100th times 3 is going to be 3/100ths. I know 1/100th times 4 is going to be 4/100ths. And I want you to keep thinking to yourself, don't get thrown off that when you multiply by a decimal that's less than 1, that your answer will be smaller. It will be smaller than your whole number multiplier. It always is the case, okay? Because in this case, you're multiplying each number by 1/100th or 0.01. Okay, so I'm going to keep doing this. Okay, and then I'm going to block this off when I'm finished here. Oops. Okay, and we have one more column we're going to do, and you could probably predict what decimal number we're going to multiply by. So I'm just going to write a note down here, multiplied by 1/100th, okay? Now, last case here. So we're going to multiply, you guessed it, by 1,000th for each number. So let's lay this all out, times 1. And I want you to think to yourself as you do this, what is going to be the product in each of these cases? And like I said, we have established a pattern now in the previous 3 columns, right? Times 5, times 6, times 7, times 8, and times 9. Okay, so look at all of these cases here. Again, going back to the previous examples, you know in all of them you're going to have the whole number multiplier in the answer, right? So I'm actually going to fill it out this way. You know in all of these cases, you are not multiplying by 1/10, you're multiplying by 1/1000th, right? I'm just going to highlight this too. Let's do yellow here. So in all of these cases, you're multiplying by 1/1000th. All right. So you know that it's not going to be 0.1 or 1/10. You know the answer is not going to be 1/100th or 0.01. What is it going to be? Well, in the first case, you know anything you multiply by 1, you get itself. So it's going to be 1. The answer will be 1/1000th. Same thing on the next line. Okay, so you're going to follow the pattern. 1/1000th times 2 will give you 2 thousandths. 1/1000th times 3 will give you 3 thousandths. And then you can continue filling in the rest of the products down below. So hopefully by now you've seen the patterns that we've established here when you are multiplying a decimal number that's less than 1. Now, mind you, we've only worked with 1/10th, 1/100th, and 1,000th, but I'll give you different examples after we summarize what we've come up with here. Okay, so block this out when you can. Okay. So you know the pattern is going to continue if we continue to the 10,000ths, the 100,000ths, and the millionths. But we're going to stop here at 1,000ths. So here we go. Notes. What have we seen from above? Well, I would say the first thing that you need to write down so that you're not thrown off when you get products, when you're multiplying a decimal number that's less than 1, is when you are multiplying a whole number. Okay, this is important when you're multiplying by a whole number by a decimal that is less than, I'm using the less than symbol as an abbreviation. The product will be less than the whole number multiplier. What do I mean by that? Okay. So here, example, when you multiply 1/100th times 9, your answer is 9/100ths. The whole number multiplier is 9, and your product is 9/100ths, right? So what I mean to say is that your resulting product is going to be less than whatever the whole number multiplier is when you are multiplying a whole number by a decimal that is less than 1. Okay. Now, there's other patterns you've probably seen too. I'm not going to write them all down, but a few things you want to look at too is that the number of zeros after the decimal increases the smaller the number you multiply by, right? So if you see in this case, like I'll go across here, for example, 1/10 times 1 gives you 1/10, right? So there's only there's one digit after the decimal place here. If you look at the next column, 1/100th times 1 gives you 1/100th. Because you multiply by 1/100th, there's 2 digits after the decimal place in the next column. And then in the third example, because you're multiplying by 1/1000th, okay, you've got 3 digits after the decimal place in the decimal multiplier. Therefore, you have 3 digits after the decimal place in the product. So that's what I mean by the number of zeros after the decimal increases the smaller the number you multiply by, right? Now, this is only specific to 1 as well. As you can see, too, that in all the cases, and only because you're multiplying by 1/10, 1/100th, and 1,000th, that the last digit in the product is the same as the whole number multiplier, right? So, for example, because you're multiplying by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the last digit in all of these cases, I'm actually going to erase the highlighter after this. You don't have to highlight this. I'm just highlighting this for you to see it. The last digit in all of these cases, it matches the whole number multiplier, okay? But that's just another observation, only specific to multiplying by a 10th, 1/100th, and 1,000th. Okay, so maybe you're asking yourself, okay, well, what happens when you're not multiplying by 1/100th or 1/1000th or 1/10th? How are we going to do that? Well, kind of a similar thing too. So let's do 2 different examples. And I'll do this in a different color down here. Because say you have something like, I don't know. Okay, say 3/10 times 7, okay? Now, how would I deal with this? I know that 3 times 7 is 21. I know there's going to be a 2 and a 1 in my product because 3 times 7 is 21. Now, does it make sense that your answer is going to be 21? No, of course not. Is your answer going to be bigger? Is it going to be 210? No, because you're not multiplying by a power of 10. You're multiplying by 3/10. So what are you going to do? Well, I know that similar to above, if I look the patterns up here for 1/10, I know that I'm going to only have one digit after the decimal place because I'm only multiplying it by the 10th, right? I know the answer can't be 21. The answer has to be 2.1. Again, this also applies to the notes up here. The whole number multiplier is 7. The actual answer or the product has to be less than whatever your the actual product has to be less than the whole number multiplier because you are multiplying by a decimal that is less than 1. So the answer to 3/10 times 7 is 21, okay? Now, what if you had an even smaller decimal you were dealing with? Well, okay, so say you had let's do 4/1000 times 9. Okay, now I know in my answer, I'm going to have 36. Why? Because 4 times 9 is 36. But does it make sense that your answer is going to be 36? No, because you have a decimal number. You actually have quite a small decimal number in 4/1000. So there's no way your answer is going to be 36. There's no way your answer is going to be 360. Your answer can't be 3,600. So what is it going to be? Well, I know in my thinking, I'm going, okay, well, I know if I had 4/10 times 9, that would only give me 3.6 because it's one digit after the decimal place. If I had 4/100 times 9, if 4/10 times 9 is 3 6/10 or 3.6, then what would 4/100 times 9 be? Well, wouldn't that give me another digit after the decimal place? So 0.36. If you look above at the column of multiplying by 1/100th, notice we have 2 digits after the decimal place there, right? So what would happen to our answer if we had 4/1000 times 9? Well, then hopefully by now you would have predicted that your answer is going to be, actually I have too many decimal places here. that you're going to have 36 thousandths. Okay, so that's how you work other examples. But we go back to the patterns that we established up here when you're multiplying by a tenth, a hundredth, and a thousandth. And that can help guide you when you're trying to estimate your answers in different questions when you are multiplying a whole number by a decimal that is less than 1.